Basically, when you come to a spot, you want to make sure that your table is set up, ready to go. So we want to clear the area that we're going to bend in. Get our tools in our right. If you're right-handed, put them on the right side. Keep things ready to go. So you got a space ready to go when you bring your glass to your pattern. Cut. In my preparation to make a bend, I'm going to make myself 2 equal pieces. So I've scribed my glass with my file. I've separated it into 2 pieces. Cut. Now with my 2 pieces, of course, I need to make a weld. I'm actually introducing my glass into the fire, just warming it up a little bit, and I will sit and concentrate to get her warm enough, liquid enough to adhere. I'm ready to kiss my 2 edges. Brought together, keeping it warm, a little bit of melding. A little push and pull. Try to get the sides of the tube, keep her a little warm. Moving to a flat surface. We'll try to maintain. Cut. Now I'm going to move into what's called a right angle bend. To do that, I need to mark my glass. Looking at my pattern, I find that my center mark to the inside of my 90-degree bend. So I basically mark 2 times the thickness of the glass that I'm using. I will now move into what we call a ribbon burner. Adjust my fire slightly. And I'm going to evenly heat my glass around the complete circumference. Keeping in mind that you have one side heating. A tube will actually have 4 sides, so you've got a top, a bottom, side, and another side. So when you're heating, just keep it as even as possible. To make an even bend, you need an even heat. Keep the heat within your marks. Keep that bend in your mind. You know you're making a right angle. So think of it, see a right angle in your mind. Bathe the bottom of the glass, be prepared to come off the fire, and see that 90. Now I'll move to my table, set it in my pattern, quickly grab my 3rd hand, and just flatten it a little bit to get a level, and then adjust it to fit my 90. As you can see, it fits right in the pattern. Cut. I've done my right angle, so I'm setting up to do what we call a double back in the field. In a double back, you need a little more room to make it around. The secret is around. You're going around something. So you don't want to stretch it. You want to make sure you have enough glass to do so. So I find my center mark by the end of my pattern, increase the width of my stroke to at least half again, tube size. I will move over into my ribbon burner. Again, evenly. The secret to this, to any glass belongs to me. If you're going to make an even, nice, clean bend, you better heat it nice and evenly. Heating my sides evenly now. Feel my glass softening. Top, sides, side, and now I'll bathe on my bottom. I'm about ready to make my bend. You can see it sagging. I use my lines to raise and lower my bend to make adjustments. I'll get to my table to make it flat. Use your 3rd hand again. And then to keep it level, I'll put my block like this. To hold it level, let her set up. Cut. My next bend in this sequence is going to be what we call a drop bend. Actually a drop turn. So for my marks, I'll go back to my original mark from my 90 underneath as my starting mark. Again, because I need enough glass to make it actually 3 surfaces, glass, area, glass, I need 1.5 times the width of my glass that I'm using to have enough glass to continue my bend. At this point, I will move over to my ribbon burner. I have to accommodate myself to produce, figure a way to get this to rotate in the fire. So I figured to do it this way. This is still a little hot from the last bend. You could let it cool, come back and hold this with your hand. Stressing even heat. Any way you can get to it. Let that heat get underneath there. Sides again. Sides. We want the tube to have the same amount of heat in that spot. I don't know if the video is showing it, but the glass will yellow a little bit. Give you an indicator. I'm getting real close. She's actually already starting to drop on me, so I'm feeling my glass. I'm dropping and I'm turning. That's why we call it a drop turn. I'm going to get to my pattern to line up. At this time I have enough time to make some adjustments. Use your third hand again. Check your 3 corners. Let her set. Cut. Something we didn't discuss very much was larger sweeping bends, like larger double backs or just soft curves. Or in this case, here's an O sitting here. Well, I've got a letter P in front of me, and I'm going to figure out how to make my bend from here, make this U bend right here. I've got a starting mark that I'll find. I'll put it on my glass. And I'll actually use my hose to sort of prefigure what kind of space I need to bend. Transferring this to my glass. I will then hook my glass back up. Moving over to my ribbon burner, I notice, well, I need a little more adjustment. I need to make sure, and ribbon burners, they adjust from 1 inch all the way up to 16 inches of heat. I'm kind of lining my lines up with where my fire is, and adjusting my fire to my lines. And I'm going to do the same thing I basically do with a large double back. There's not much, you don't have to blow too much, but I'll still hook up my blow hose just to maintain my pressure to keep it from collapsing. I'm maintaining my 4 fingers on the bottom. Each hand, I'm rotating with my thumb. A practice, another practice. Before I leave my fire, I'm getting soft now. I'm getting to a soft state where I feel like I'm close to move. But before I leave, I want to double check my marks again and make sure they line up with each other. When I move over to my pattern, I'll try to hit my marks. That is our goal as tube benders. Wash the bottom half, let her sag a little bit. Gravity will help you pull things in. I'm letting gravity just take that. I'm basically just lifting. I get to my pattern, get my third hand again, make a little adjustment, making sure that the mark that I started with is hitting its mark. Knowing that I can move on to my next bend, whichever way it may be, and cut. I was working on a letter P anyway, so I might as well complete it. After that sweeping bend, it's cooled a little bit. I'm going to make my marks for a double back here, because I actually want this leg to come back over here, to connect to an E, which will be the next letter. So again, I'll move over to my ribbon burner, remembering that we had it adjusted out for our big bend. We'll come back in, then work. Now I've set myself up and put my hands across each other because this is still too hot to hold. In a production shop, you'll want to keep on moving. You don't want to waste any of your boss's time or money. So you'll learn to handle whatever you can in a direction to keep on moving. If not, let it cool and start on another piece. Or go pump something, prepare something else. But don't ever waste time waiting for something to cool. So I'm setting myself up. I'm feeling that I know which way I'm going to bring one hand up and work on my sides a little bit again. Bathe my bottom a little bit. She's sagging on her own. It's time to raise and bring it over itself. At the same time, I am applying pressure to try to maintain the roundness of my tube. And always help with a little block. Set it to the table and use the block for your height. And cut. A 2 and a 1. Now that I've done that double back and had it set up, my piece is almost complete. But I see that I got to close this leg down. The reason I didn't close that leg first, I made my hardest bend, largest bend first. I made my small bend to get out of the way so that I could bring my leg to its side. I need my marks again, so I'm marking to the inside because it's technically a 90, but it's a soft 90, so it's a little bigger. It's about 3 times the width of the glass. I'll use my ribbon burner again. Make sure that I have my blow hose ready. I use my ribbon burner for a lot of bends. However, the new bender can try and feel and use any torch that he feels works. A lot of guys use our little crossfire that's sitting behind us. I like to use my ribbon. It's just what you learn on. What you learn on is what you'll master. So this being a soft bend, I'm just letting it kind of fall into place. I'm visioning that bend in my mind like I always do. And if you've made your lines right, you'll fall right into the pattern. And cut. Now that I've got my P almost formed, I've decided I'm going to make this a unit, a single unit P. So I need to get an electrode on somewhere and cut. Now the first thing I need to do to finish this as a complete letter, I need to go ahead and put an electrode on. I'm starting to finish off my ends. So I've got to cut it somewhere. I figure I'll put my electrode on the inside first because I'm going to put one here. It'll just be as easier. I like to do my hardest situations first. So I actually use something that's in the industry called a wire cutter. Basically a little handle with a tungsten wire. I apply a charge through it, it heats up. The heat ring goes around the glass. I sink it with a little coolness of my finger. A little bit of saliva maybe will help you a little bit. And it'll crack your glass very nice. Now I decided to go ahead and use my tubulated electrode first. Tubulated, as you know, has a tube going into it. It's free breathing. I want to close one of the ends off. And I'm going to hook my letter P to my connector on the far end. And I'm going to actually weld my electrode here. I think for welding, excuse me, I like my crossfire. You will have to figure some angles, sometimes figure how to get in there. You can only rotate halfway, but that's okay. You got fires, you have fires coming from both sides. So if you rotate half, you're getting fire to all sides of that opening. I'll bring my second piece, which is my electrode, near it. I got to back away a little bit, make sure I got my blow hose. I'm trying to heat the surfaces up, just the ring of the tube itself. Maintain about 1/4 inch distance. Color of the glass is telling me that it's time to bring together. I just kiss them together very lightly, don't push very hard. I keep my heat on it a little bit, and I work. Maybe this little black background will help. A slight pull out, a slight blow up, and then level. I don't know which angle my cameraman can see. And cut. Well, now that I've got my electrode on, I'm ready to put my second electrode on. which in this case will be a non-tubulated. It's closed. I kind of fold the wires to get them kind of out of my hand so I can hold on to them. But I've noticed that I'm going to actually bend. This double back's actually going to end up right here, so I've made my marks here. This glass is too long, so I need to remove that. I don't want to remove it right exactly. I want to give myself at least 1/4 of an inch from there to attach my electrode. I'm going to play violin with my file. And I'm just going to do a slight pull. This becomes waste. Then I'm going to separate my connector to where I can hook up to my electrode. Find out how I can hold it, get a comfortable hold on it. And I'm going to move over to my crossfire again. And I'm basically repeating myself what I do with my tubulated electrode. I'm just having to hold it a little different because it's a little different shape. Basically doing 1/4 turns again because again I've got fire coming from 2 sides, so a 1/4 turn is going to get me fire on all 4 sides. Sounds funny saying 4 sides of a tube, but to make sure you're heated, keep remembering that word, heat it evenly. When I feel I'm about ready, I get to kiss them together again, just like I always do. I work and push and pull and shake a little. Inhale, exhale, a little rewarm. There's the preparation of there's my electrode seal and cut. After I've got my electrode applied, I want to get my electrode out of the way again. This is probably going to fit in a channel letter or something in the future, so you want to make sure it's the size it should be. A simple double back is needed again. We already had our 3 marks from where we picked them off the pattern. So basically I'm just putting a double back on the end of a stick with an electrode on it, just to back the folder out of the way. I like to concentrate on my sides when I'm doing a double back, and then wash underneath and bring her up again. Double check hand comes into play again. I can't emphasize this 3rd hand. And cut. 1. Now that we've got our electrodes on our unit, we need to figure a way how to get it to the pump, which is where we're headed now. So I use a piece of tubulation glass, which in my case is a 6mm piece, and I'm just going to do my typical weld. Only what we're doing here is like a miniature weld. So I figured to really show it, I will use my hand torch instead of one of my little torches. I'll reach over here that I have my hand torch hanging. I'm going to install my mouthpiece again. And I'm getting ready to heat both of these ends just like we do using a 2-sided, what we call a splicing torch. And I'm going to splice these 2 pieces together. You've probably already noticed by now that my glass is clear, so there's no reason for me to make a mercury trap or anything. I know I'm going to process this unit with neon gas. So I'll just need a straight piece of tubulation. I make sure she's good. I don't want any leaks. I've made it this far. Leaks right here would only hinder the finishing of my project. And cut. We're actually looking at our pump through a piece of glass that's covering it to protect it. I'm ready to turn on for the morning, so I reach back here and I turn on my main roughing pump, and you will hear it come on. And then basically I move over to the other side. We've put this shield over here to protect our diffusion pump, and I turn on my diffusion pump for the day. I start out around 9 near high, get my fluid actually moving. We're in a warm-up stage right now. We're warming up our pumps for the morning. Cut. 1. The last thing I want to do in my setup for the day is I want to go ahead and close my vent valve, which is very important to leave open when you shut down, which we'll discuss shutting down procedures in a few minutes. After you've got your vent valve done, your pump's open, you move over here and turn on our big power. This activates my bombarder, which I will be using in the process, so I'm going to turn it on now. We attached 2 red light stars to know when it was on. to let anybody else know that entered our small little shop here that it was on. This is a safety factor that we've kept in place to keep everybody aware that we're using high voltage in this room. And after turning our main power bombarder, we want to control that bombarder. We have a variac in place in our shop, so we have to turn on the power to our variac as well. At the same time, we might as well reach over here and turn on our vacuum pump. Excuse me, our vacuum gauge. That's our final vacuum gauge. That's our technical vacuum gauge. And cut. After we've got everything turned on a little bit, we might as well look at what we've got in front of us. What we have here is a Precision 2 by Daco Neon. It's technically a double-sided manifold. You could pump on this side as well as you could pump on this side, right, left. In production shops, that could be necessary because you have a lot of neon to do. While you're waiting for something to happen over here, you could be preparing this side over here. You have a few little devices in here that people are wondering what they are. To go over it real quick, this is our main stopcock. This relieves pressure to all the vacuum pumps which are under the table, which we showed you earlier. You can open and close this at different times when you want to maintain your system under pressure. Again, we'll get into that during the bombarding procedure. You have a valve here which controls the flow of neon gas. When I want to introduce neon gas to a tube, I would use this valve. You move over to this little yellow valve, which the reason it's yellow, it's kind of giving you a little caution sign. This is a high-performance vacuum gauge, which you heard me mention a few minutes ago. This vacuum gauge has a sensor tube right here, which needs to be isolated from the system whenever there's electricity running through the system. When you have your finger on the bombarder switch, your vacuum gauge should be closed. The reason being, electricity will damage the sensor. Okay, now that we've said that, we move on to this little gauge you see here in the middle, and I'm just moving from my left to my right. This is a torr gauge. It's a way of measuring pressures again. Pressures, low pressures, high pressures. When I introduce something into the system, this will read my pressures. This dial is a little bit rougher than my technical gauge. My technical gauge will tell me in smaller increments what's a little more accuracy. As I move down to my left again, I've got another similar valve that we found earlier with the neon. Now we're using argon. In the neon process, we say neon a lot, but there are a lot of colored tubes that we use argon in. Argon is another inert gas, which is the last 5 that we found on the periodic chart. You move over here, you've got what we call an isolation valve. This valve can control me to open air or vacuum, and then of course my unit's connected to there. Again, we will touch that. In the middle here, there are times we have to introduce a little bit of pressure to our system. We have a relief valve. We have put a small piece of our blow hose on here just so we could pinch it off for an open and close situation. We also have another relief over here in case there are times we may have a broken unit or something wrong over here that we need to repair during the bombarding process. We can actually attach our blow hose here so that we can put our back pressure in that we're used to doing when we bend glass anyway. Going back to our P, I've explained the equipment very basically. Going back to our unit that we were making earlier, we've got our tubulation on it. Please keep your ends polished so you don't cut any of the rubber connections in here, and which would cause a leak in the future. When I say polished, just brush it in the fire a little bit so it rounds out the ends, let it cool. In our system, we're using what they call a Delrin situation. We have a cap and we have a small O-ring. When the cap pinches the O-ring, as the cap screws to the glass, it pinches the O-ring and applies a pressure around our tubulation glass, eliminating any need for a hard weld. So we apply a seal by an O-ring on the end of our tubulation. The cap presses against the O-ring. We screw it to the Y attachment, and as it pinches that rubber, it squeezes around that tubulation, forming a seal and cut. Our next step in this case would be to go ahead and hook up a temperature gauge. We use a little Daco Neon equipment temperature gauge here. We try to locate a spot in our unit closest to the middle because you will get more heat near an electrode. So I want to balance. I'm trying to find a center spot in my unit. At this time too, I'm hooking things up, so I might as well complete my hookup. I need a bombarder lead. we're pumping one unit, so it doesn't really matter where you place your bombarder leads. Just make sure that the wire's not laying on your unit itself so they don't burn it. In fact. Then I'm going to find my second bombarder lead, which there are two coming out of your bombarder. Connecting a unit to a manifold is nothing any dissimilar than connecting a neon sign. We're using a series circuit here. We've got a major transformer coming into our unit. We've got the same transformer leaving our unit. In this case, it goes through a milliamp meter before it returns to the unit. The milliamp meter is another device that we use to keep an eye on the milliamps that we're applying to our system as we're bombarding. Okay. Well, now that my unit's connected to my manifold, I need to bring my unit pressure into my manifold pressure. The first thing I'm going to do is check my relief valve and make sure it's closed. And make sure everything else on this end is closed, because I am separated at this time. This is not connected to my vacuum. Remember the isolation valve. At this point, I will slowly but surely open my isolation valve, paying attention to my O-ring seal. The thinner it gets, the closer I am to opening up. It's okay, don't worry about your okay, you saw that, that's cool. I have my isolation open now, where now my system is open, no pressure up to here. I'm just double checking: neon closed, vacuum gauge closed, argon closed. I'm going to open my main to my pumps at this time. When I do, I will be keeping an eye on my torque gauge. That lets me know that I'm getting to, my pressure is getting to a stage. And cut. Excuse me for that little glitch. What we are trying to do is bring our pumps into our system now. Everything is closed off, pretty much ready to go. I'm at my main stopcock. My reliefs are closed, my isolation is open, so my whole system is open to that unit. At the point of opening this main valve, you will notice your torque gauge to go down. Obviously, if your torque gauge doesn't move, there's either something wrong with your torque gauge or something wrong with your vacuum. This gives you an idea how your system is. If for some reason it wouldn't get past, say, let's say 3 or close to 0 as possible, and it's still rising maybe, there would have to be a leak in the system somewhere. Chances are, 9 out of 10, the leak is not in your manifold. The leak is in your unit. Because your manifold worked yesterday, why wouldn't your manifold work today? Chances are you have a leak in your unit. At this point, everything's looking pretty good. You saw me turn on my main power a little bit earlier, so you know I'm live at my leads. I'm going to check my little, we call this a Deadman Switch in the industry. I'm going to check to see if I've got a charge, if I'm pulling any vacuum in that unit with just a little flash of electricity. Obviously, if I get a light, I'm showing vacuum. Okay. At this time, I'll take a few seconds. I knew I struck an arc. I know my system's going to work. But I want to look at what I'm pumping today. I'm pumping 13 millimeter glass with 13 millimeter electrodes on it. I notice I have ceramic ends on my electrodes. They're 30 milliamp electrodes. We have a basic chart that we follow with some parameters at a starting current, a middle current, and then of course a final current. We're going to do pumps in 3 stages, and what we are doing is called closed stopcock bombarding. You will see why as we move into it. My system's been pumping right now, and I struck an arc. I'm ready to try to heat up my glass a little bit and relieve some of the pressures and some of the contaminants that might be inside this glass. So at this point, I'm going to close my main, and I'm going to add some air from the atmosphere. The way we created the system, we put a little piece of blow hose, we pinch our little piece of blow hose, we open our relief valve, and we let the space in the blow hose, that air enter the system. Seems that we figured it out that 1 pinch, 1 open equals 1 torque, so we do it twice. We now have about a little over 2 torque in our system. We strike our arc. We told ourselves that we were going to start, so we were working with 1330 Cs. We got to start somewhere around 250 to 300. These are Fahrenheit numbers in the case. I will be using Fahrenheit and Celsius a little bit. When it says turn it up to 300, you'll look at your milliamp. You'll actually turn your variac to 300. Again, this is a stage. This is my first stage. It's a warm-up stage. I want my tube to be warm. What I'm going to do. Okay, notice that we broke the 75C that was recommended by our electrode manufacturer. That's our first heat. At this time, I use a little crayon put out by another company. It's what we call a temperature crayon to give me a little signal. So I'll put a light little mark on there. That's just going to be something that I keep my eye on, that I'm going to use against my temperature gauge. I'm going to move into my second phase right now, which is I'm going to open my main and bring it back down a little bit. See, this is a nice system. It pulls down rather quickly. We haven't looked at our other gauge yet. We will look at that at a certain time. I'm going to add my torque again by closing my main first. Going a little faster this time because I've explained it once already. 2 pinches. I usually end up with about 2 torque. I go to my flash. I'm still at 200. I want to maintain her around 300. At this time, my final current level, I know because of my chart, is going to be around 550. So somewhere from 250 to 350 will be our second stage. At this point, what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to warm up that glass. We want to heat up the glass and release contaminants from the walls, which will eventually suck out of our pumps. If you'll notice, my little crayon's starting to smoke, and you'll notice I'm at 200C. I'm at a proper temperature. I will open my main though because my torque's rising. Anytime you heat up something with pressure in it, you're going to make more gas. You're going to fill that space a little bit. As I remove my torque, I've actually taken out some of my impurities. My electrodes are at the stage where my manufacturer says I need to bring them to a glow to finish out my process. You remember that I quoted that our final current will be 550. At this time, I'll turn it up to 550. The only goal I'm after right now is I'm trying to bring the metal shell of the electrode to what we call a cherry red, to totally eliminate the gases from our metal. And I'm done. Again, we'll make sure our main's open. For final accurate pressures, why don't we go ahead and use our vacuum gauge? We'll open our vacuum gauge while we're waiting. We are going to actually wait till about 50C before we put our gas in there, and we'll discuss that when we get there. Okay. Down around 46, 50C, centigrade that is, we're cool enough to apply our gas. We've been under pump with our main open. Our isolation is open. At this point, we just kind of glance over at our technical gauge and make sure we're pulling below 5 microns, which we are. We've done pretty well. So I'll go ahead and close my main. And I'll look at a chart that we have sitting in here, which is available on all transformer loading charts. At the bottom, you'll find it. I'll find my tube size again, which was 13. I know I'm filling it with neon. So I need to take my 13 millimeter tube and fill it with 10 torr pressure of neon. I'll go to that neon valve that we mentioned earlier, which has a little red dot on it. Always remember that neon burns sort of red, reddish orange. That'll help you remember. Very carefully, we're going to ladle in some gas. And I just... We have to get to 10. We're at 10. At that time, I'll do a little flash to check to see how I'm doing. And cut. I'm going to tell you something. That's exactly what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to bring us back to where we were. A few minutes ago, while we were setting this unit up to pump it, we thought we'd pumped it right, but then when we closed our main to fill it, we noticed that the pressure lift in our torque gauge. That told me right away, as an experienced tube bender, that we had a leak. Well, I want my basic person to figure out how to find a leak. So unfortunately, and I say unfortunately with a lot of regret, they were introduced to this tool here. Anybody in my industry knows about this tool. It's a very dangerous tool. It can actually cause you more problems than it can help you solve. But if you treat it with respect and only keep it on your neon unit, don't get it anywhere near your technical equipment, you can find things with it. While my tube's under pressure, it's pulling right now. So I'm going to look by rolling, and I'm not pointing. I'm actually putting my little pointer on top of it. This arc will go to ground, so see, it's heading right to my wire. I can't find a leak anywhere, so I roll across my well. Oh, there she is. I got a minute leak right there. So I need to repair that before I can proceed any farther. Glasses like this, matter of fact, I'll show you. At this point, I'm glancing over at my my technical gauge. It's going to show me my final pull. I notice I'm below 5 microns, heading towards 2. I'm safe pretty much to making good neon. My temperature's at 49C. Recommended fill's 50C. Fill for a 13 millimeter tube in neon is 10. I keep a chart on my table so that the guys can know what to go by. It can also be found at the bottom of a conversion chart or a transformer loading chart. To fill, I'll close my main. My tube's clear, I already know it's neon. I'll go back to my little gauge with a red dot on it I mentioned twice earlier. And I'll slowly bring some gas in from the tank system into our manifold and unit. It said 10, I'm going to take it right to 10. Very easy gauge to control. I will then go over and glance at my unit. I've done this all within a 50C range. I do a little flash test to see it. If I got problems now, I want to fix it now before I pull it off the pump and maybe another man in the shop says, hey, this unit doesn't work. Do something, one time if you can. We'll flash it and check it. We got a nice neon color there. We're looking good. At this point, I'm going to move over and get my tip-off torch. It's a special torch that we've put into our system for doing pretty much nothing but tipping off the smaller diameter tubes. I'm going to step in front of the camera here a minute and change sides. Might as well get a little bit of the electricity out of your way, so this time you can remove your temperature gauge. You really don't need to see it anymore. Being as it's neon, I'm only going to tip it off once. So I'm going to come pretty close to my unit, trying to stay in the middle of my torch. I'm heating my tube completely around. You can also warm up your tubulation a little bit. If there's any condensation or any moisture in your tubulation at this time, you might as well kind of warm it up out the back side of the tube. Idea is to close the neon in on here without letting any air in. My tube starts to collapse at a temperature. I remove my heat. I pull slight pressure out. Come back in heat, pull slight bit more, and then hit her right on the little thinnest part, let it fall into a little ball. At this point, we have a completed neon unit. We want to see it work. And a cut. 3, 2, 1. At this time, we have a little aging area. It's kind of a bunch of units that we've done in the past week are sitting there hanging around. We like to keep things and let them know that our system's working right all the time. So I obviously want to test this unit we just finished making. I put my units on a 12,000 volt, high power factor, 60 milliamp transformer. I want to run them a little hot. Probably hotter than they'll ever be run in the field. Down here and turn my little power on. And voila, you got neon. Of course, this is the unit we just did. Looks just as good as the units that Matt made yesterday. And the units that Bill made, his purple borders are looking really good. All I could make was a P. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our little story about neon. My name's Rob. I'll talk to you later. And cut.